Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Heart's webinar series. This is our first webinar for 2018, and we thank you so much for joining us today. Today's webinar is Fostering Empathy for Animal Companions, and we wanted to let you know at the start to post any questions you have in your question box anytime throughout the webinar, and we'll be happy to answer them at the end. I also wanted to let you know that shortly after the webinar, I'll be emailing you with all the links that we refer to throughout it, so you don't have to copy them down from the slides. We'll be sharing those with you. And one of the links will include a direct link to our animal resource guide, which we'll be referring to throughout the webinar. Several of our activities and lessons are either from the animal resource guide or related to it. And we're going to have some additional resources in that email as well. And the last thing that we'll be providing in that email is a survey about the webinar. And if you could complete that survey, we would so greatly appreciate it. It's a huge help to us, and your feedback means a lot. So first, we'd like to introduce ourselves. I'm Kim Corona, and I've been working as a professional humane educator with Heart for 13 years. I've been working as a professional humane educator for 13 years, 9 of those years with Heart. And in that time, I've taught comprehensive humane ed to K to 12 grade students in school, after school, and summer camp programs, facilitated numerous professional development workshops throughout the U.S. and Canada, presented at conferences, and developed comprehensive humane education resources. And I'm presenting today with my colleague, Gail Mayer, who's also a dear friend of mine, and one of Heart's humane education instructors in New York City. And I'm going to turn it over to her so that she can tell you a little bit about herself.
Hello, I have been an instructor with Heart for about 4 years. And like Kim, I've also taught programs in kindergarten through 12th grade, some in-school programs, some after-school programs. I've also done summer camps. One of my favorite programs to teach is the one we do at Animal Haven, an animal shelter down in downtown Manhattan that we call Caring Kids. And it's a program that we run for youth age 5 to 8 years old, where we focus mostly on companion animals, and we use a lot of the lessons that we're going to be talking about today in the webinar.
Thanks so much, Gail. So we're a comprehensive humane education organization, which means that we teach compassion and respect for people, animals, and the environment. And we have offices in New York, Chicago, Indianapolis, and Portland, Oregon, where we provide direct services for students from K to 12 in traditional and non-traditional learning environments. And we also offer educational resources such as the resource guide that I mentioned earlier, webinars like today, and in-person trainings across the country as well as virtually. Additionally, we provide consulting assistance related to teaching humane ed and developing humane ed programs. And lastly, we advocate for humane education in the educational and governmental sectors. So our agenda is going to start with some tips on humane language and humane communication in the classroom. And then we're going to share some of our tried and true activities and lessons to hopefully get you started with some ideas for teaching humane education. If you're new to humane education, hopefully you'll have a lot of things to get you started. If you're seasoned with humane ed, some of these suggestions may be familiar to you, but hopefully you'll gain some new ideas as well. And even though we're a comprehensive humane organization teaching about human rights issues, environmental issues, farm animal welfare, wildlife protection, and animal companion issues, and how all these issues are connected, today's webinar is really focusing specifically on companion animal activities and lessons. And a lot of the focus is on dogs and cats, but we have some content related to other animal companions as well, so we're not leaving them out. And I also want to let you know, if you have a different focus or a multi-issue focus, we hope that you can apply a lot of the strategies that we're discussing today to whatever your specific humane ed topics are. And then we're going to share some humane literature suggestions, because humane literature is always a great and easy to use tool for promoting humane themes, fostering empathy, a great opportunity for critical thinking, and an effective place to start by giving background knowledge before engaging in service projects. And then lastly, we're going to give some quick and simple suggestions for program assessment. So we want to offer some important tips and strategies to remember when teaching related to communication, because the specific content you teach is only a part of the message that your students will remember. They're also going to remember how you made them feel, and the way we communicate and the way we present our content influences the way the youth we're working with are going to feel. We want to build a good rapport with the youth we're teaching. And in all the years I've been teaching, I've never needed to say no or wrong during discussions with students. And this doesn't mean that you should, promote inaccurate information stated by students or validate inappropriate comments. It just means that you can use humane education strategies to find ways to build off what they're saying, and to use critical thinking questions to challenge their comments or opinions. So for example, I often find myself saying, I can see why you would think that. Have you considered this? And following with a question. Or I see what you're saying. What do others think? And then opening up to the class, and then together you can evaluate all the suggestions, ideas, or opinions that have come out. These are just a few examples, and they're not going to apply to every situation, but hopefully they'll give you some ideas of other ways to respond besides no and wrong that will encourage you to speak up more. If you give those other simple answers, that might shut them down or make them feel nervous to share. We also encourage humane educators to use respectful and inclusive language. So we've provided some examples here of what we mean by that, such as referring to animals as he or she instead of it, so that people see animals as someone, not something. And we'll be using this language today, such as guardian instead of owner. You could even create a whole lesson specifically on language, its power, and how it affects our thoughts and behaviors. We often feel really passionate about the content we're teaching, and that's why we teach it. But we have to be careful, especially when it comes to challenging topics, such as dogfighting. We don't want to talk about dogfighters as being evil or bad. As educators, our aim is to reserve judgment and to create a space for open dialogue, to encourage critical thinking and understanding the causes for certain behaviors so we can work toward a more just tomorrow. It's easy to say dogfighters are bad people, but this just shuts down the conversation. And if there's kids who have grown up around dogfighting or know people who do it, you've sort of already taken them out of the conversation when they're the very students you want to reach. Consider talking about why people might dogfight and focus on the specific consequences that are caused by it, and have discussions about how the students feel and think about it and what can be done. And this is going to make everyone feel more included. Another tip we want to talk about is avoiding one-on-one debates and opening up questions to the whole group. Sometimes students will make a declarative statement or ask an open-ended question directly to you. Don't feel like you have to be the one to respond. If you respond directly with one point of view and then the student replies with another, this can easily turn into a one-on-one debate going back and forth. And you want to avoid this situation because you're starting to argue and you're not modeling the compassion or empathy that you want to promote, and you start excluding the rest of the class from the conversation. So instead, try to facilitate a productive conversation that involves everyone in the class by asking the rest of the students to share their opinions and their thoughts. And then encourage students to share their different points of view with one another so they'll learn from each other. So an example of this is, I had a student say to me, are you saying it's bad to buy puppies from a pet store? And your reaction might be to think, yes, that's what I think and that's what I'm saying. But as educators, again, we don't want to tell them what we think. We want them to think about it. So consider explaining that you're there to discuss where many puppies sold in pet stores come from as compared to where puppies and dogs in animal shelters come from, so that they can decide for themselves how they feel about the situation. And then open up this question to the class by asking what they think about buying a puppy from a pet store and or adopting animals from an animal shelter, and why they think and feel that way. When possible, validate students for making really good points to build a positive dialogue with them. When we agree with something that they say, they're more likely to stay open to new ideas. If we immediately dismiss them, they can shut down and not listen to what else you have to say, and they could even become disruptive. So you want to find ways to build bridges with what they're saying, and then challenge them to think beyond the initial perspective. And then lastly, be sensitive. People don't usually change attitudes or behaviors instantaneously. We often need time to reconsider previously held beliefs and to process new information. During a program, students might be struggling with internal conflict between what they previously believed and new thoughts that are coming in. They may express guilt about their past actions and opinions, or want to change certain behaviors, but not know how to. So take the time to validate their compassion and explain to them that they shouldn't feel guilty about past actions when they were unaware of an issue. Encourage them by letting them know that now that they're more informed, they'll be able to do something about the problem or make a different choice in the future. It's also really important to remember, depending on the age of the kids you're working with, they might not be in a position to safely make their own choices. So let them know that change doesn't happen overnight, and to do what they can now. And as they grow up and gain more independence, they can make more choices that align with what they believe. I also just wanted to let you know, in the email that we're going to be sending you, following up with the email, we're going to provide a handout on these communication strategies, and we'll have examples of what each of those strategies look like in practice. So we're going to be focusing on providing examples of activities and lessons within our content that foster empathy, ways to use questioning and discussion techniques to encourage critical thinking, and really importantly, examples of service projects that will empower youth to know that they can take actions for animals. So with having said that, we're gonna jump into activities and lessons with Gail.
Okay, so with the activities and lessons that that you might be covering on the topic of companion animals, one thing to be aware of is that some of the content that we refer to could be graphic. We suggest that if you're ever unsure if something is age appropriate, that you err on the side of caution. If you're providing a program in a school, we always recommend sharing that content with the teachers or administrators in advance so they can review it and let you know if there are any concerns. And if you're leading programs directly through a club or an after-school program, a summer camp, or something like the program that we do at a special facility like an animal shelter, you can also inform parents and guardians directly of the topics that you're covering, so they know in advance what to expect. When we're teaching about animals, one of the first topics that is really helpful to start with is talking about animal feelings and body language. Because at its core, it's important that we understand that animals have feelings, they have their own feelings, and it's really, really helpful for youth to be able to recognize the feelings that animals are experiencing by looking at their body language. And it helps us when we're thinking about animal feelings to understand the next level, which is care and concern for their well-being and caring for them properly. So there's lots of different ways to talk up to students about animal body language and animal feelings. We're going to cover one of the ways that we've found to be most engaging. So we like to start with showing pictures of animals in different that are expressing different body language, and ask the students what feelings they recognize based on the body language. We could so I actually like to usually start, before I even talk about animals, with pictures of people, and make the connection that people and animals both express body language, and that when we look at the facial expressions and the posture positions of humans, we know how they're feeling without even um, hearing them say anything. So we like to show these pictures, and I give students the opportunity um, to guess which feelings these people are experiencing based on what their face looks like and their body positions, their posture. Another way to do it is to play charades by writing down feelings on a piece of paper and ask the students to act them out without talking, so that it just builds the understanding that body language is a way that both humans and animals express our emotions. When we move to speaking about body language with dogs and cats, a really useful tool is a chart like the one that you're looking at now. There's lots of these available online, so you can take a look at what is out there and choose the one that you like the best. These are two really good examples that just explain to students what the body positions look like for animals experiencing different emotions. And I always like to point out the ears, that the things to focus on, the things to look at most closely, which are the ears, the tail, and the entire body position. We can also look at where the paws are, the eyes, although you can't really see them in these pictures, in these charts, but those are other things to also pay attention to. So it's helpful also when you have these charts to also look for actual photographs of animals that are displaying these body language examples. They don't have to match exactly, but as close as you can find is helpful to show students real-world examples of what we're talking about with those body language positions. So when students are confident that they understand the different ways that dogs and cats express their feelings, we can ask them to match up different body language examples with the emotions or the feelings that the animals are experiencing. One of the games that I like to play that is a really great way to excuse me, to do this activity is I like to put pictures of dogs and cats displaying different body language positions all around the room, and I give students one at a time a little card that has an emotion on it, and the students have to match the card to the picture or the pictures around the room, and they can use the chart that I gave them as a guide to be able to do that and figure them out. And it can be challenging, so there are different ways to do it where you make it more age appropriate. So for really, really young kids, I've done this before. Instead of words written on the card, we can write smiley face or an angry face on the card, and then they can match that up with the animal picture. And with older children, you can make it more challenging by using more complex emotions like nervous or submissive. So it's a really adaptable activity to various age groups, which is fantastic. A more challenging way to do this, to meet, cover these same issues, are for the students to match up pictures of animals with pictures of people displaying the same emotions. So we have a couple of examples here, and I love this one with the the girl and the cat look so much alike. So you can do it in groups and pass out like a stack of human pictures and a stack of animal pictures and ask the students to find the matches. They could do it in pairs. You can also do it by posting pictures up around the room. There's lots of ways to do this lesson. And another nice thing about it is it helps build that bridge between humans and animals, showing how similar we are. Because there are a lot of similarities between the emotions that humans feel and the emotions that animals feel, and making that connection helps students to see those similarities and feel closer and more connected to animals based on those similarities. After you have done one of these activities about animal body language, you will want to debrief with the students, not just by taking a look at the matches that they made and praising them for getting so many correct, but also by discussing how they knew the animal was feeling that way. And when you do this, you can refer back to the chart and say, oh, you use this as a guide. But also by talking about what the animals were feeling and also maybe why they were feeling that way. Another thing that I like to do at some point during this lesson, and I usually do it in the debrief, is to talk about, based on the emotion that you see in that animal, would the student want to get closer to the animal or maybe stay away from them? And this is a way to squeeze in a really important concept of keeping ourselves safe. So not getting close to an animal who might, be about to display some dangerous behavior, but also to be able to talk about respecting the animal's feelings by staying away from them when they're displaying behavior that shows that they are not interested in further contact with humans. So another way to foster empathy for animals and to promote responsible animal guardianship is for youth to think about some of the ways that people and animals are similar in what we need. So it's important to value the differences between, people of different cultures and people and animals of different species. But when we focus on our differences, it's easy to separate ourselves from others and to see us all as independent from one another. But when we focus on our similarities, it helps to create those connections and create more of a value for each other. So we like to build those connections by talking about how some of the needs that animals have are similar to the needs that humans have. And we like to do this as a lesson that can be a quick warm-up to another lesson, or it can be a longer activity all on its own. One of the things we want to do, or we like doing, is having students brainstorm some of the needs that companion animals have, that they, things that they need in order to be happy and healthy. And they will come up with a long list of things, and you can also make connections between how those needs are similar to human needs as well. As a longer activity, and we have some examples coming up on the screen now, and students, in most situations, students are able to come up with a lot of these on their own. Sometimes we need to prompt them a little bit, and I will ask questions like, what if the animal gets dirty, to remind them that animals need baths? Or what if the animal gets sick, to remind them that animals need to go to the vet sometimes? But it's a really fun activity, and it gets them, it's one of those activities that really gets them talking. So it works really well even in groups that tend to be more quiet. You can turn this into a longer activity, and it works for students from kindergarten to 4th grade by having cards or pictures of images of things that both people and animals need, and ask the student, and then a picture of someone, a person who is receiving that need, and then have the students match up the picture of the person receiving the need and the picture of what the need is. So you can see on the screen we have a picture of a glass of water, that's the human need, and the water dish for dog or cat, that's the animal need, and the students would be matching those up. And one way to do it is to have them look for another student around the room who's holding the card that matches their need. And when they meet, they can talk about the need that's on their pictures. And then after everyone's pictures have been matched up, you can have them come up to the front of the class in pairs, in their matched up pairs, and discuss with the rest of the group what their need was and why it's so important for people or animals to get that need met. And some of them that you will talk about will not be quite as simple as food and water. We can also go through some of the other needs, and some of them might be more complex, like grooming and hygiene. This one is, so we're just going to flip through some of the needs that you would talk about or that you would include in this activity, and give the students the opportunity to discuss why those things are so important. So one more way to do an activity that covers what animals need to be happy and healthy, some of the ways that guardians need to, some of the things that guardians need to do to take good care of their animals, is we like to do a game that we call the companion animal relay. So with this game, we split the students up, the participants, into two groups, and we like to use a stuffed animal to represent a real animal, where we put those at the front of the room, and we line up the two groups, and we have a big bag that's full of all the things that dogs need to be happy and healthy. So like it would include a collar and an ID tag, a leash, a brush, a food and water bowl. We also include some of the things that we should not be giving to dogs, like chocolate or grapes, or a shoe or socks and things like that. And those are all mixed together in the bag. And one at a time, the participants come up to the front and pick something out of the bag, and they have to decide if it's something that dogs need to be happy or healthy, or if it's something that they should not have to be happy and healthy. And then we just designate that if they think it's something that the animal needs, they can put it next to the stuffed dog, and if it's something that the animal should not have access to, then we put it away in a separate location. And this is a fun game. The two teams can compete and see who can finish first. Another lesson that we have on the same topic, to expand it beyond dogs and cats, is a similar lesson for companion animals of other species, like cats, parrots, rabbits, hamsters, and turtles. And you can find this in our resource guide on page 11. So this is a written example, but it's very similar to the animal care relay we were just talking about, which you can also do a non-written version, exactly like the one we just explained with dogs. And in our resource guide, you can find the written one, so you can see it on the screen right now, where students would see the picture of the animal and then think about things that they know about that animal, and maybe some of the ways that those animals need care, and some of the things that we need to do to take good care of them if they're in our care. This is a good opportunity to teach students that animal adoption is not just for dogs and cats, but if they are considering adding another species of small furry animal, like a rabbit or a hamster, a reptile or a bird, into their family, that adoption is a great option for those species as well. And we can talk about how these animals are also at risk of becoming homeless, just like dogs and cats, when their guardians decide that they no longer want them or can no longer take care of them. And a fantastic way to be able to help and reduce homelessness of those species is to adopt from a rescue organization. And we can also talk about how adoption of all species prevents other animals from being bred into existence for profit by pet stores and the organizations behind animal breeding, or from it also prevents them from being taken from the wild and sold into captivity. So one more way that we cover animal care is by teaching about humane training. It's a really, really important thing to teach, especially for youth who either have a dog or a cat or another animal at home, or are planning on getting one at some point in their life. Some students will come to this lesson with the idea that the only way to train an animal is by yelling at them or hitting at them. And they're not saying that because they don't care about their animal or because they're not compassionate, but often it's what they've observed in their family or in another setting, and they believe that that is truly the only way the animal will learn. So we like to introduce this as another way, a better way to teach animals proper behavior. One of the ways we do this is with a guided visualization. So this guided visualization, I'm going to read it to you in a moment. It doesn't teach them everything they need to know about training, but it is a great way to start the conversation and get them thinking about from the animal's perspective and fostering empathy by putting themselves in the animal's place. So we'll share it with you as if you were students in the class. So the first thing that I do before I start the guided visualization is ask you all the students in the class, to close your eyes and take a few deep breaths. So imagine that you are a puppy. You sleep most of the day curled up with your mother and your brothers and sisters. When you're not sleeping with them, you're playing with your sisters and brothers. When you're still very young, you're taken away from your family and you're confused about being in a new place. You meet some people and they become your new playmates. For the first few days, there are children and grown-ups nearby all the time, playing with you and petting you. But after a few days, your people disappear for long periods of time, leaving you completely alone. You cry and scratch and chew on everything that you can. Finally, your people come home and you're so happy. You jump on them and wag your tail with joy. But one of the people comes up to you with a chewed shoe and starts yelling you and hitting you with the shoe. You're terrified and you cry out in pain when you're hit. You don't understand what you did wrong. Now I want you to imagine, instead of the people yelling at you and hitting you, they did something different. Before leaving you alone, they put their socks and shoes away and they taught you to play with your toys. They make playing with your toys fun and they reward you when you chew on them. If they see you chewing something you shouldn't be chewing, they firmly say, "Leave it," and immediately show you one of your toys. They encourage you to play and chew on your toy and praise you when you do the right thing. They know that yelling at you for something you did a long time ago will only confuse you. They know that if they can't be there with you, they should not allow you to have access to places where you can get into trouble. When you're ready, you can open your eyes. So that's the guided visualization, and we will usually follow it up with asking some questions so that students can process it. So the questions that we like to ask after the guided visualization is, the first one is, when you were the puppy, did you know the difference between chewing a shoe and chewing a toy before someone told you the difference? So often, of course, students recognize no, that they would not know the difference until they were told what the difference was. We also ask, is it fair to hit you and yell at you when you didn't know the difference? And students, of course, recognize that that is not fair. We give students the opportunity to answer on their own, and we ask another question. There are lots of different ways that people choose to teach someone some different things. which way would you prefer if you needed to be taught the difference between what's okay to chew and what's not okay to chew? Um, and which way do you think you would learn better? And of course, students often recognize that the best way to learn is by redirection. So the second way that we gave in the guided visualization. So we also ask, this is a little more of a deeper thinking question. It's better for the older students, but this next question is, how would the first way affect your relationship with your guardian, or how would the second way affect your relationship with your guardian? And students can recognize that the animal, the dog or cat, can feel more close and connected and trust the guardian more when they're treated the second way rather than the first way. And which way do you think that your dog or cat at home, your own companion animal, would prefer, and why? And we get some great answers from that question as well. So Kim is going to go into the next activity that we do about animal investigators.
Thanks so much, Gail. So, those first activities, a lot of them were about animal feelings and animal care. And then the last one started to get a little bit into, how an animal might be harmed or not, depending on the type of training techniques we use. So now we're going to get into some animal neglect issues. So this lesson is called Animal Investigators, and it is from our Animal Resource Guide. It's on page 64, and we're just letting you know those pages, so when you get the guide and you refer back to the archive version, you can easily find them. And I also wanted to make mention that the Animal Guide we co-created with the ASPCA and the International Fund for Animal Welfare. So this lesson focuses on animal neglect, as I mentioned, and students take on the role of an animal investigator. They're given a scenario where a woman has called to report a dog living in her neighborhood who's not been taken care of. But the guardian of the dog, whose name is Bud, says that she does take care of him. She says he always has water, he's fed twice a day, and even though he's not allowed inside the house, he has a dog house. So your job is to visit the scene to gather evidence and determine who is telling the truth. So students will examine this first picture, which gives an overview of Bud's environment. And then they're going to see these additional 4 pictures which give close-ups of the situation. With each picture, we have a set of questions that they have to ask related to the image to gather evidence and decide if that evidence supports the guardian's claims or the neighbor's claims. And as the instructor, you're going to facilitate a discussion around what the students think. Oftentimes, based on the evidence, students think that it's clear that Bud is not being taken care of. And so the students will review the needs of a dog and why Bud's needs are not being met. And then you can connect this conversation to real life and discuss, what they would do if they saw a dog in real life in Bud's situation who was being neglected. And it's really important in this discussion to provide students with suggestions that are safe for them, reminding them to always tell a trusted adult who can help them to contact the proper authorities. You want to make sure students know that they shouldn't be trying to rescue animals themselves because it would be dangerous. And if they do have a concern about an animal, always find an adult who they can trust. So in Bud's story, he's very thin and he has a shelter that's not going to really protect him from the weather. So you can follow up this activity while the kids still role play as animal investigators and consider teaching them about body condition scores of dogs and cats. You can use charts similar to the one shown here to teach kids what is and is not a healthy weight for animals and show them images of dogs and cats who, some are very thin, some maybe are overweight, some are at a healthy weight, and have them investigate the body condition score of those animals and decide if they think their health is compromised or not. And we talked about graphic images. Depending on the age of the kids you're working with will depend on, how severe malnourished animals you're going to show them and what would be appropriate. But it's really good because they can, use this knowledge in real life to recognize when an animal isn't healthy. And showing them overweight animals is also really important because most of the time I think when kids think of animal neglect, they think of animals that are really thin. But when animals are extremely overweight, it can severely compromise their health as well. And it might mean that they're not getting any exercise at all. They're getting way too much food. And, they might not even be able to walk if they get too large. And that can really be harmful to them. And then in reviewing shelters, you can have them investigate shelters and identify, while they look at different images of shelters. And again, you can pick the images you show that are, based on the age of the kids you're working with, and have them identify which shelters they think meet the legal requirements in the community and which do not. And then beyond that, even if a shelter meets the law, do they think that shelter provides their dog with a happy and comfortable life, and why or why not? So I was actually covering this topic once with a group of middle school students. And one of the young men that I was teaching said, deciding on what type of shelter is appropriate really depends on whether or not the dog is an inside dog or an outside dog. So I asked him, if you were a dog, what kind of shelter do you think, would be appropriate for you? And he, paused really thoughtfully and then responded, when you put it that way, I would definitely want to be in the house, and I think all dogs would too. And, he said he realized that he didn't really see dogs as, being, any dogs as being outside dogs anymore. So all it took for him to reflect on his perspective was to put himself in the dog's place, and it really changed his perspective. True stories are another really effective teaching technique. Statistics are powerful and they're important, and we definitely use them, but stories are often what really stays with us, and they give a face to the issues that we want to discuss. It makes the issue personal, and it shows us how an issue actually affects someone. And again, we've talked about this a few times tonight, but it really fosters empathy because we can put ourselves in the place of whoever the story's about. At Heart, we use true stories or stories based on real individuals' experiences for almost every topic we cover, whether it's a human rights issue, an animal protection issue, or an environmental conservation issue. So I'm going to share one powerful story that I've been telling for quite some time. This story is about a friend of mine named Lacey who ran away from home and was living on the street. One night she was hurt really badly by a group of people and she was left to suffer. Thankfully, someone came by, they saw her, and they rescued her. And this is my friend Lucy. She received the medical care that she needed, and when she was adopted into a very loving home. And the reason I tell the story this way is because I don't want students to focus on whether or not she was a person or a cat, but for the fact that she was hurt and that this could have been prevented. So a lot of times my students' first reaction is, why would someone hurt an innocent cat this way? I always let them know that's a really good question, and I want us to think about that together. So students will start to consider why this happened, and even kids as young as like 4th and 5th grade will recognize the following. Maybe whoever hurt her wanted to take their anger out on someone weaker than them. Maybe they wanted to act tough to prove something. Maybe it was peer pressure. Maybe they had a prejudice against cats. A cat scratched them or bit them before, and now they have an anger towards all cats. And then we talk about each of those reasons and discuss if they're the same reason a person might someone might hurt another person. And they recognize that a lot of the reasons that people hurt non-human animals are the same reasons that they hurt other people as well. And then finally, we think about solutions. So kids suggest things as being a friend to someone who needs one. If they know someone's going through a difficult time, suggesting to an adult that they think that person needs help and might need someone to talk to. If they themselves are going through a hard time, to try to recognize that and get help that they need. Encouraging others to get involved in the school or community in positive ways to reduce their chances of falling into negative peer pressure. And, of course, the reasons we provided and these solutions don't cover all the reasons someone might harm a cat, including some really serious psychological issues. But it definitely starts to help identify some of the common concerns that can be dealt with to potentially protect both people and non-human animals. Personal stories can really help you to introduce challenging topics like intentional harm. Or if you want to cover something like dog fighting, again, a really difficult topic. If you shared a story about a dog who was rescued, who was involved in a dog fighting situation, that can really help to introduce that topic in a way that's more easily understood by the students. And we encourage you to make it personal. So share your own animal rescue stories. If you've rescued animals yourself, you can share those stories. If you work for an animal adoption center or an animal rescue organization, you can share those stories. And if you're like a classroom teacher or, a parent, you can share stories from a local animal adoption center. Most rescue organizations have their animal stories online. And again, I shared a story of a cat, but you could easily share stories of, any animals, animal companions, dogs, and, these work for farm animals and wildlife animals too. The one thing that I want to say is we really encourage you to use stories with happy endings so that students are left feeling hopeful. So now we want to share some resources and activities we have on the topic of animal homelessness. Not all youth have experience with animal shelters, the work they do, and how they differ from pet stores. So we made this video with a generous grant from the ASPCA, which is available for free on our website, and it's called What is an Animal Shelter? So it depicts state-of-the-art animal shelters and shows why animals are there, why it's not a permanent home, and the importance of adoption. And again, we're going to provide this link for you. And a great thing about this video, it's really great for all ages, from really young kids to older kids. Young kids, it's really beautiful images. It's all positive. There's nothing graphic. And even older kids love seeing the cuddly animals. So to look more deeply into some of the common reasons animals become homeless, we created an activity called Helping Homeless Animals. This is also in our animal resource guide on page 43. And in the activity, youth work in small groups, and each group is given a fictional homeless animal story based on many of the common reasons that animals are surrendered to shelters. And they're given questions, and that helps them to process the story, and they think about what could have been done differently. So here's an example of one of the stories in the activity, and I'm going to give you a moment to read it to yourself. Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to read that. And you can see in the story, we're going to discuss with students why Benny was surrendered and what his family could have done differently to address their concerns and his behavior in a healthy way. You can use these stories as a good starting place, but you can create your own based on the issues that you want to address. And you can, great follow-up to this is to have students rewrite these stories with a happier ending based on what the guardian in the story could have done differently to address the animal's needs and to keep them in the home. Another writing activity, and whenever you can have writing activities, that's great for kids to develop their academic skills. And teachers in the classroom, that's a great way to get into the classroom is by having reading and writing activities. Is this lesson from our animal guide. It's in our lesson, My Story, How Did I Get Here, on page 88. And in this activity, students use this graphic organizer to answer questions from the point of view of a dog or a cat. And it's about a family they lived with, and then they either ran away and became stray, or they were surrendered. And they use the responses to these questions to then write their own story from the animal's point of view. This worksheet is also from our guide. It's part of a lesson called A Happy Home for Every Dog and Cat on page 68. And this lesson covers a few topics, one of which is animal overpopulation. And students can use their mathematical skills to calculate how many puppies one unspayed dog could potentially be responsible for in just 2 years. As the facilitator, you'll lead a discussion at the end of the activity, asking students to think about who's going to care for all these puppies and how could the guardian of the dog prevent these puppies from being born through spaying and neutering? So it's a great opportunity to talk about all the benefits of spaying and neutering. A happy home for every dog and cat can also be taught through a digital experience via a platform called Nearpod. So we developed a digital version of this lesson, which can be taught through a one-to-one experience. So all you have to do is log on to the platform, and if you have a facility where each student has a digital device to use, their own computer, an iPad, or a notebook, and then if you had like a smart board, they can follow along with the lesson, and they'll do activities along the way, such as taking polls, drawing activities, short answer questions, group discussions, and more. And in addition to this lesson being on this platform, we have other lessons as well, including lessons focused on endangered species, farm animal issues, and child labor. So, there's not a lot of prep for the teacher because the whole lesson is right there, ready to go, all the visuals, and you can scroll through and lead a class. And it's ready to go. So having said that, I'm going to turn it back over to Gail to talk about some more resources that we have.
Thank you, Kim. So beyond the next step after talking about animal homelessness is to discuss puppy mills, as long as it's age appropriate. There's always a way to do it in an age appropriate way. Puppy mills is when I have the opportunity to do a puppy mill lesson, it's very rewarding. One of the things about teaching about puppy mills is that people of all ages are often very surprised to find out that puppy mills exist and what goes on. And it really does change their perspective and often leads to behavior change. And people, often tell me that they're not going to consider buying a dog or a cat from a pet store anymore after learning about puppy mills. One of the tools that we've created for teaching about puppy mills is this video called What is a Puppy Mill? We made it with a generous grant from the ASPCA. And it's really great for students, but they must be at least 9 to 10 years old, which corresponds with about 4th grade and higher. And it's great for adults. It has images about what goes on inside of puppy mills. So we wanted to show the devastating conditions that exist, but we did not include the worst case scenarios in this video. That makes it a little bit more appropriate for the younger students. And the video ends with actions that people can take to help shut down puppy mills if they're concerned with treatment of animals. So it goes through, that adoption is a much better option. One of the reasons why we connect puppy mills with homelessness. So we talk about how it's so important to spay and neuter and also to adopt. That helps reduce the number of homeless animals there are, and it takes away the financial incentive for puppy mills to continue purposely breeding dogs. And there are also kitten mills. We like to point that out as well. Even though we don't have a video on kitten mills, they do exist, and they do contribute to the homelessness of cats as well. And then the second point that comes off very, very clearly in the video is the poor conditions that the animals are in when they're in puppy mills, how poorly they're treated, how poorly cared for they are. And that really does touch all of the viewers who see the video. As Kim mentioned earlier, with these lessons, it really does help to have some true stories to share. The stories that we have not only help connect the viewer with with the animals that are going through these experiences, but also we want to end with a positive, and so it gives the viewer some hope that it's not all horrible stories and situations that we're describing to them. So we like to share puppy mill survivor stories, and I encourage you to either share some stories that you know or use some of these examples that we're giving. One of the reasons why this is really helpful is because when students learn about puppy mills, one of the first things that they say is that they want to go and save all the puppies. And so, of course, we can explain to them that it is really important that the people who are going to these places and protecting the animals there are trained professionals, so that when they become older, they can become a trained professional. They become an animal rescuer, a humane law enforcer, or certified through an rescue organization such as Humane Society. If that's something that they're interested in. So this is an example that you see on the screen of Billy's rescue. Billy was saved from a puppy mill. It's a really short video. In the beginning, it does have graphic images of the conditions that Billy lived in when he was in the puppy mill. But he's saved. And you see him when he gets to his adoptive home. He's one of the cutest dogs that you've ever seen. He's so precious. And one of the great things about this video is it also sort of breaks through a stereotype, because the person who rescued Billy is this sort of tough-looking guy with piercings and tattoos. And it's a really great example for kids to see this individual displaying the compassion, even though he doesn't look like the kind of person who has such a soft spot for a little guy like Billy. But he does display, really, really amazing compassion for Billy, and it really shows students that compassion and vulnerability can be expressed by anyone, adult males, adult females, boys, girls. We all have the ability to have compassion for animals. Again, this is just one of many examples you can find if you look on YouTube. But we like this one a lot. It's very short. It can be easily incorporated into a 45-minute lesson, which is usually how long our classroom lessons are. And it absolutely is touching and will melt your heart. I've seen it and shown it to students hundreds of times, and I still tear up when I watch it. Another excellent tool to use in humane education is books, and there are really a huge number of humane-themed books available out there. So you can collect some of them and create your own humane-themed library. If you're a classroom teacher or a parent, you can have it at home, an educator for an animal rescue group. Make those books available to the children and students that you're working with or that you're involved with. You can also develop some formal programs using these books by reading them aloud to students, asking some good critical thinking questions after the stories are over, or providing a hands-on project or a service project that relates to the content of the book. And it's a great way to also get volunteers involved. If you have volunteers coming up to you and asking if they can help with your activities and with your programs, you can. It's something that requires no training. You can sit them down in front of your participants with a story, and they can read it to them. And kids love hearing someone read a story to them. So it's always an engaging and interesting, fun activity for the participants. There are a lot of different humane books available for dogs. These are just a few examples. You can find a lot more if you do a little search. These books that we're showing here cover a range of topics that we've discussed today, including animal needs, animal neglect, homelessness, and they also cover puppy mills. So another great thing about using books as a tool for humane education is that they are usually written in age-appropriate way. So the really challenging topics, especially the puppy mills and the animal neglect, can be really difficult topics to cover with young participants, but these books do it in a way that is not intimidating or overwhelming to the youth. And we also have some examples of humane books for cats that Kim is going to go over.
So, again, just like Gail said, she really emphasized the value of these humane books. So we just wanted to share some examples with you. There's a lot of great ones out there, and you can just see these. They cover a range of topics from animals being heroes to the human-animal bond, to cats that are stray, who maybe we don't recognize it and they need a home, and issues with animal overpopulation. And, unfortunately, I only was familiar with a handful of books for other animal companions. So we're only showing a few of those with you today. I'm sure there's more out there, but I did have difficulty finding some. So if any of you know of some great other animal companion books, that would be great to share. And, from preparing for this webinar, it made me realize I think there's a real need for that. I did find some others, but from the summaries of the books, I thought there were some concerns with the humane issues that they were with some of their messages. So I didn't want to necessarily promote them here, but that's not to say if a book has some issues that you're concerned about, not to use it. You can use it as teachable moments. When you get to those parts, ask students good critical thinking questions, and that'll help them to question what's being promoted in the book and to learn how to look at media with a critical eye, which is always a really important skill to gain. So with having said that, I just want to take a moment and recognize that it is 8 o'clock and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I just want to let you know the end is, we're near the end. We're just going to go over service projects quickly and assessments. And I think we'll run over just about 10 minutes. So I hope everyone's able to stay on with us. If you're not, we certainly understand. And it will be archived. So if you have to log off, you will be able to watch the archive one to hear the end of it. But I just wanted to let you know how much longer we have. So if you're able to stick with us, that would be wonderful. So after learning all that content, a great way for students to feel like, they can do something now that they've learned about all these issues is to do service projects. And, we really encourage you to give background knowledge before kids do service projects so that they understand the value and the importance of it. Toys for Animals is absolutely a great way to get kids involved. It's a really easy way for kids to take action. If you work directly at an animal rescue group, obviously you can have them make toys for the animals you're working with. If you're a teacher, you can contact your local animal rescue groups or shelters and find out what they need and then make those specific ones. And a lot of these toys are made out of reused materials, so they're really inexpensive and they're good for the environment. And we have some on the top for cats, some on the bottom for small furries, and the one on the right is a chew toy for dogs made out of, you can make that out of an old shirt or pants or something out of old fabric. Spreading awareness, kids love to make posters. So after they've learned about different animal welfare topics, you can have them make a poster, make it really engaging, give them time to do drafts and get peer review and do a final version. And, of course, you can always put them up in your school or your rescue organization. But to really have a big impact, you could frame these nicely and contact local agencies in your community and ask if they'll put them in their storefront or if they'll display them somewhere prominently in their establishment. And then when kids are out in the community, they can see their messages and know that they're really having a big impact on the community. We did this in New York as a service project where the kids actually helped us to contact the agencies. And so when they asked them, can we put our posters up when we make them? And they said yes. The kids felt so much ownership and so much pride out of spreading awareness about different issues like low-cost free spay neuter in their community. And it was really great. You can make a PSA. So for those of you who are tech savvy and you know how to use like video editing software, you can teach kids about an issue, have them make signs and, discuss what they think about the issues. You can, videotape them learning about the issue and then put it together as a PSA. And this is one that we made about pit bulls after students learned about the myths of pit bulls and they got to meet some pit bull ambassadors. And we're going to share this link with you in the email that we send following the webinar, and you can get an idea of how to do a short PSA with your kids. Another great and pretty easy project is to have the kids make a book or a zine. So with younger kids, we had them make a little book, and this was called Ginny's Journey after they learned about small animal companions and their care and adopting them, and about guinea pigs also being bred in mills. And here's an example of just a couple of some excerpts. So they put the story together from what they learned, and there was these images where they could color, so every kid was responsible for a couple pages, and then we assembled it, and they actually displayed it at an animal clinic where people could learn from this book that the kids made themselves. You could do Stenton starters to make it easier for younger kids to write the book, and with older kids, they can take ownership of creating an outline, dividing up the content they want to include, and they can all create their pages, and you can put it together, and then they can distribute it to their peers. Doing outreach is great. So if kids are really passionate about an issue, they can create tabling materials and leaflets, and then you can have them go out to a busy area in your community with you chaperoning, of course, and they can distribute their materials. So here's some of our kids. They wanted to do awareness about homeless animals who are up for adoption, and they're giving out materials about the local animal shelter. And then lastly, advocacy. So this is a way for kids to have a really big impact, is they can learn about local or state legislative issues related to animal welfare issues. And you can teach them how to lobby. And then you can set up meetings with their local representatives, and you can take them on a field trip so that they can discuss their concerns about legislation and their recommendations. And this was a group of students we worked with in Chicago who went to their state capital, and they discussed dogfighting legislation and farm animal legislation. So those are just a handful of service projects. There's so many, and you can also get ideas about service projects from your students. Sometimes they're the most creative with coming up with actions they want to take to make a difference. So, get ideas from them as well. This was just a small handful to get you started. And then lastly, we're just going to briefly cover assessment. We're not going to go into this in too much depth, but we just wanted to remind you that assessment can be really important. I know it's difficult depending on how much time you have to prepare and how much time you have with the kids, but if you're able to create a rubric about what your intended objectives are, and then you can more easily evaluate the effectiveness of your programs based on that those rubrics. And you can find out if you're meeting your intended objectives, or if you're not, based on the results, find ways to modify to reach your desired goals. So here's just some, simple creative ways to assess your programming without the kids feeling like they're being evaluated or tested as they would if you gave a questionnaire. And it's not to say that you can't do that as well. We certainly have done it in certain situations. But when you can make the assessment project-oriented, it's a fun activity. It's something you would probably do anyway, and it can demonstrate if the students learned, what you were hoping for. So these are just a few examples. You can take a look at them. So these are ideas of what, you would hope the student understood by the end, and if they're able to do that, and, and then you can talk about it. There's so many great resources out there. So we just wanted to share some other agencies that are doing really good humane education work. There's so many out there, and we apologize if we left anyone out, but these are just a handful to get you started. Some of these organizations have great lesson plans to share. They have great resource toolkits with videos and books. Some of them you can become a certified humane educator through or get a graduate degree in humane education. You can find a community of other educators, get conferences. Some of them have books. So I really encourage you to go to these different links, and you'll be amazed at how much is out there if you're trying to, start for the first time or expand what you already have. So with that, I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening, and thank you for staying over. And we appreciate your interest in humane education. And you can get more resources via HEART's website if you join our e-newsletter. So you'll get a link directly to that in the email following. And you're going to want to join because we have a lot of exciting resources being developed as we speak, including this educational game where youth will help our compassionate investigators in training, or the CIT squad, to solve mysteries. And the first one is about a case of sick puppies. And the player will follow along with Cora, Kazu, and Casey to help rescue animals and solve cases. So you're definitely going to want to find out when that game is available. And we really hope that you stay in touch with us, and you follow our website to get more. And you can like us on Facebook, you can follow us on Twitter, you can visit us on Pinterest. And just a last thing that I want to emphasize is in that email we're going to share with you with all these resources, we're also going to have the survey I mentioned earlier. And, we really enjoy being a nonprofit that can offer these webinars as a free service. And we want to continue to build that webinar library. And, we want to develop future webinars based on your input. So your feedback is really essential. It's really, really important to us to help our efforts in developing future webinars that are going to be, based on what you tell us and what you're interested in. So please fill out that survey when we get it to you, and I'll send it very shortly after the webinar ends. So with having said that, even though we're out of time, Gail and I are going to stay on for a little bit to answer any questions. And it looks like there are some questions that have been asked throughout. So we're going to look at those now. So the first question I see is, do you have any assessment to determine if children are impacted by your humane education activities? Is there any evidence to suggest that humane education is making a difference in communities where it's been done? Yes, program assessment is important and critical, but, doing it on a larger scale. So, I really appreciate this question. And actually, we have done some large studies. We did a study with CUNY and Dr. Bill Samuels, and there was another study, and I'm sorry it's escaping me, but we do have some of that information on our website, and I can provide a link to that information when I email you. So we personally at Heart have done some studies on our own programming that have shown that humane education has helped with increased pro-social behavior. We've also done studies that showed, for example, if students had compassion for certain groups, that with humane education, it sort of expanded their compassion and who they had compassion for, and it increased their knowledge on a lot of topics as well. So that's a great question, and we definitely need that important quantitative data to show the credibility and validity of humane education. I'm sure there's some other studies out there as well, but I'm not going to speak to those directly, but I know with Heart we have done studies, so that's a great question. So someone asked, do you ever use the term non-human animals? Since humans are animals, we should make sure that students know that humans are just one of the many types of animals. So I think that's a really great question, and we definitely use that term sometimes. You might have heard me and Gail say it a few times throughout the webinar, and I should have mentioned at the beginning, when we say animals, we're referring to non-human animals, just because it was a little difficult to say non-human animals the entire time, but to acknowledge that people are animals as well, and we're talking about non-human animals. So that's a great question, and it's definitely a part of inclusive and good, effective, humane language. So we definitely teach students about that and to recognize that people are animals. And I know we didn't say it every time throughout the webinar, but it is something that we talk about, and I'm glad that you brought that up. And it is something I think that we should encourage students to recognize. Oh, and Gail, did you want to add anything to that?
I think you covered it really well. Yeah, I think sometimes just for parsimony, I will use animals, but in many classes, the students themselves, one of them at least, will bring up that humans are also animals. And especially when you're already talking about so many similarities between humans and animals, and you encourage the students to put themselves in the animal's position, it's sort of like a natural progression for students to for it to come up that humans are also animals. And sometimes I even, talk about how we're not just animals, we're a certain type of animals, that we're mammals, and how do you know if an animal is a mammal? We have hair, give live births, we feed our young with milk, and it really establishes those similarities and that connection, and makes students realize that humans and animals are the same in so many ways. It's a good question.
Yeah, thanks for that. And, again, I definitely encourage at the beginning of the program, if you're going to be saying it a lot, to say when we're saying animals, we are referring to non-human animals, to recognize that people are animals too, and having a conversation about that. So I hope that helps to answer your question. So the next person said, what are some ideas to get these classes and lessons into public schools, where, there's a lot of standardized test scores to be concerned about, and there's a lot of regulations on the content. So I appreciate that question a lot. And at Heart, we've actually been able to get into, we mostly work at public schools, and we work at a lot of low-income schools, particularly because we want to offer our services to a lot of schools that might not get a lot of additional services otherwise. So, at Heart, we particularly work as guest educators when we're, and doing direct service. And, that's usually the areas that we teach in. But, we'll teach anywhere. So we teach all different types of schools. But the majority are low-income schools. And one of the ways that has helped us to get in, we've been very lucky, is that in New York City, which is one of the areas that we work with, local city council members have discretionary funds that they can use to help their community. And a lot of council members will give us funding to provide our content to schools. And we can't always do it as in-school programs with that council city money, but we can do it as an after-school. And a lot of after-school programs are really open to, guest educators coming in, especially if your content, besides being humane ed, also has some academic skills. So like I mentioned, we have a lot of activities that have reading components. We have the one activity with a math component. So if you can have your activities aligned to academic skills that are also really engaging and multimodal, a lot of after-school programs are going to really welcome you. So they might run an after-school program, and that's a lot of time for them to fill. So if they can have outside people come in and help them fill that, that's, great to them, and it really helps them out. For getting programs into in-school, we also align out our content to standards. And if you download our animal resource guide, which is free, the lessons, and so we have activities which are shorter little activities, and we have longer lessons. Those lessons are aligned to Common Core state standards. So that helps administrators, to know, oh, this lesson, even though it's on these humane themed topics, it's going to also help to meet the academic standards that we need to meet. Additionally, we have a Justice for All guide. It's on the same page that you'll find the animal guide. And that's broken up into themes that cover human issues, human rights issues, animal protection issues, and environmental issues. So if, you're open to teaching those issues and, all that broad range of topics. Sometimes a school might be more interested in like an anti-bullying lesson or a lesson about the environment that goes with their science class. And they'll let you, then teach the whole thing where, you can teach some human rights focused lessons, environmental focused lessons, and then some non-human animal focused lessons as well. So, being comprehensive, I think that's really helped us to get into schools because of those topics, there's usually someone who's interested in one of them. And then when they see your approach and the critical thinking skills and the problem solving skills that these topics encourage, they often are open to you teaching more. At least that's been in our experience. But yes, schools are definitely strapped for time, and sometimes it is difficult for them to make time. But we've had really, really good experience at getting into schools, and we offer our programs for free as well. So a lot of times schools want to show that they have advanced activities for their students, additional content outside of the classroom teaching, ways that they're enhancing their students' learning. And if you're able to offer it for free, that's really helpful to them. So I hope that answers your question. Oh, and it sounds like Gail has something to add.
Yes. Yes, I would also like to add, here in New York, we also have some legislation that helps us get into the classroom because humane education is actually mandated here in New York. So if you're outside of New York, you may want to check because this legislation is really not well known and it's not enforced, but it can be a negotiating tool. So when we approach administrators, we can say, look, there's this little known mandate. You may not be aware, but it is required for your school to provide humane education to your students, and we are making that available to you free of charge so that you can comply with that mandate and we will help you do it.
Oh.
If your local legislation does not have humane education, that is something that you can get involved to make happen. So you can go to your city council or another legislative body and propose that as potentially being required for schools to provide in your locality.
Yeah, Gail, and thank you so much for bringing that up. So when I email all of you, we have a link on Heart's website of different legislation that could fall under human education, and I'll link to that as well. So I'll add that to the email before I send it out. And then I forgot to say this with our Justice for All guide, we also have some of it, not all of it, is aligned to international standards for technology, and a few of them are aligned to next generation science standards. And a lot of schools are now, expecting their teachers to have content for next generation science standards, and that's newer than Common Core. So a lot of teachers are really looking for that. And we're developing another guide right now that's going to be for middle school, and we have even more lessons because now next generation science standards have been out a little bit longer, and so we were more aware of it when we started that guide. So that could also help you to get in if you're aligning to these new standards that teachers are going to have to address. And so I see another question that's asking about Institute for Humane Education. So it just says that with a question mark, so I'm thinking that you're asking about what that is. So the Institute for Humane Education is an organization that provides graduate degrees in humane education and certificates in humane education, and it's actually where I went to school to become a humane educator. So I have a master's in education and a certificate in humane ed. So they're accredited through Valparaiso University in Indiana, and on their website, in addition to going through a 2-year formal program, they also have short month online courses that you can take to learn about doing humane education activities, or just to learn about leading a humane life yourself if you want to kind of analyze your own actions and behaviors. And they have a huge resource toolkit of lesson plans and videos and books. When we first started, a lot of our pedagogy at Heart is based off the pedagogy promoted and created through the Institute for Humane Education. So I really encourage you to look into it if you're interested in going towards more professional humane education or looking for resources. And I'll also say the Academy for Pro-Social Behavior is also somewhere that you can go to become a certified humane educator. And it looks like we might have some more questions popping up. So, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, it was a comment in the box. So, okay, so I think we answered all the questions. Did anyone have any other questions that you wanted to ask? I'll just give you a moment if you want to type anything else in that we missed. Okay, great. And and definitely, as I mentioned, you can email Gail at gail@teachheart.org or me at kim@teachheart.org. So if you do have any lingering questions, or if we didn't fully answer the questions that you asked, you can write us personally, and we'd be happy to talk to you more. So thank you all so much for your time. Thanks for staying with us late, and we will, hopefully we'll see you at the next webinar. So stay in touch for when the next one is happening, and have a great evening.
Good night.